In February 1960, a baby boy arrived at Buckingham Palace and the country erupted in celebration. He was the first child born to a reigning British monarch in over a century, and the press could not get enough of him. Photographers waited outside the palace gates for weeks. Newspapers ran front pages calling him the bonniest baby in the kingdom. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, was said to dote on him more openly than she had on any of her other children. Of all her 4 children, Andrew was the one people would later describe as a clear favorite, the boy who could do no wrong in her eyes, no matter what he actually did. That airy, unconditional adoration would shape everything that followed. Royal watchers who covered the family for decades have pointed out that Andrew grew up in an environment where almost nobody ever told him no. Servants deferred to him. Tutors indulged him. Even as a small child, he was already developing a reputation for being demanding, and the adults around him simply gave him what he wanted rather than risk a confrontation. It is easy, looking back, to see this as the first domino in a very long chain. By the time Andrew reached his teenage years, his older brother Charles had already settled into the role of heir apparent, dutiful, and closely scrutinized. Andrew, by contrast, was the spare, second in line, then third, then further down the list as nephews and nieces arrived. Royal commentators have long argued that this position without a clear purpose gnawed him. He wanted attention, and when he didn't get it through official duty, he sought it through other means: women, parties, expensive toys, and eventually private jets and golf courses paid for by other people's money. At 18, Andrew did something none of the Queen's other children had done before him. He took a real, working-class job, joining the Royal Navy as a helicopter pilot. People who served alongside him describe a young man who never quite let go of being a prince first and a naval officer second. One often repeated anecdote has Andrew introducing himself to a new superior officer by saying the man could call him H, short for His Royal Highness. The officer reportedly replied that in that case, he could simply call him Sir. It is the kind of story that royal staff swap for years afterward, because it captured something essential about how Andrew saw his own place in the world. Rules were for other people. And yet, when Britain went to war with Argentina over the Falkland Islands in 1982, something in Andrew seemed to shift, at least temporarily. He flew as a helicopter pilot aboard HMS Invincible, taking on one of the most dangerous jobs in the fleet, acting as a decoy to draw enemy missiles away from the ship. Colleagues who served with him in the South Atlantic have since said that whatever his faults back on dry land, in the heat of that conflict he held his nerve. He did not falter. When he came home, a red rose clenched between his teeth as he walked down the gangplank at Portsmouth. Britain treated him as a genuine war hero. For a few short years, the nickname the press gave him wasn't cruel. It was Randy Andy, a wink at his glamorous love life rather than a warning sign of anything darker. That image of the dashing bachelor prince followed him through a string of high-profile romances with actresses and television presenters, until 1986, when Princess Diana, newly married into the family herself, decided to play matchmaker. She introduced Andrew to Sarah Ferguson, a vivacious young woman with the right social pedigree and, crucially, none of the stiffness the public associated with royal protocol. The wedding that followed was a national spectacle, every bit as grand as Charles and Diana's had been a few years earlier. Commentators at the time described Ferguson as a breath of fresh air blowing through what they called the dusty corridors of Buckingham Palace. But the marriage that looked so wholesome on camera was already under strain behind closed doors. Andrew's naval postings kept him away at sea for long stretches, leaving Ferguson largely on her own to raise their 2 daughters and navigate a world she had married into almost overnight. Financial pressure compounded the emotional distance. The couple were living a lifestyle far beyond what Andrew's naval salary could support, and the debts piled up quietly while the public image stayed glossy. By 1992, the couple had separated, and the divorce became final in 1996. Strangely, though, they never fully parted ways. Even after the divorce, Ferguson continued to live under the same roof at Royal Lodge, each occupying their own wing of the house, an arrangement that puzzled outsiders but seemed to suit them both. As the 1990s wore on and Andrew's naval career stalled, he reached the rank of commander but was never going to rise much higher. The question of what to do with him became a real source of debate inside the royal household. The answer arrived in 2001. Andrew was appointed Britain's special representative for international trade and investment, an unpaid but expenses-covered role that was meant to put his royal connections to practical use, opening doors for British business abroad. His own brother Charles is reported to have opposed the appointment, reportedly suspecting that Andrew would use the position chiefly as cover for golf trips and socializing rather than serious diplomacy. He was not entirely wrong. Diplomats and officials who worked alongside Andrew during those years tell strikingly consistent stories. He insisted on staying in the most expensive hotels rather than free ambassadorial residences. He traveled with an entourage that sometimes included staff whose sole job was writing thank you notes, and at least one valet, whose only task was ironing his trousers, reportedly carrying a 6-foot ironing board across continents for the purpose. Behind his back, embarrassed embassy staff coined an unflattering nickname for the visits. They called him His Buffoon Highness. His protection officers, meanwhile, reportedly had their own private code name for him, a far less polite one than that, reflecting just how unpopular he had become among the very people whose job was to keep him safe. It was around this period, the early 2000s, that a far more consequential relationship took hold. Andrew had become friendly with Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of the disgraced media tycoon Robert Maxwell. Through Maxwell, he was introduced into a new social circle that included American financier Jeffrey Epstein. To Andrew, friends and observers have suggested, Epstein represented exactly the kind of effortless high life he had always gravitated toward. Private planes, exclusive parties, glamorous houses, and a constant supply of new, influential people to meet. All of it arranged for him without him having to lift a finger. To Epstein, Andrew represented something just as valuable, a direct line into royal and political circles that money alone could never buy. For years, the relationship stayed mostly out of public view. That changed in December 2010, when a photographer staking out Epstein's Manhattan townhouse captured Andrew leaving the building with Epstein at his side, the two of them climbing into a car together in broad daylight. It was the first solid photographic proof that the friendship had continued well after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor in Florida, a conviction that had already resulted in a notoriously lenient plea deal and a short jail sentence served largely on day release. The picture ran in newspapers around the world. It is often described now as the single image that set Andrew's eventual downfall in motion, because once it existed, he could no longer simply deny that the friendship had carried on. That photograph also pushed one of Epstein's victims, Virginia Roberts, later known as Virginia Giuffre, to start speaking publicly about what had happened to her. She alleged that she had been trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell to have sexual contact with Andrew on multiple occasions while she was underage, including in London, New York, and on Epstein's private island in the Caribbean. Andrew denied the allegations entirely, at one point stating publicly that he had no recollection of ever meeting her. The pressure built steadily for nearly a decade until 2019, when Andrew agreed to sit down with the BBC's Newsnight program in an attempt to clear his name. It is now widely regarded as one of the most damaging interviews ever given by a member of the royal family. Asked to respond to Giuffre's detailed recollection of dancing with him at a London nightclub and noticing that he had been sweating profusely, Andrew offered an explanation that struck many viewers as bizarre rather than reassuring. He claimed he had a medical condition that left him physically unable to sweat, supposedly the result of an adrenaline overdose sustained during the Falklands conflict. Pressed on whether he regretted his friendship with Epstein, he paused and said he did not because of any affection for the man himself, he explained, but because of the useful contacts and opportunities the friendship had brought him. Within days of the interview airing, Andrew announced he would step back from public royal duties for the foreseeable future. He never fully returned to them. In 2022, after years of insisting he had done nothing wrong, Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement with Giuffre, reportedly paying her several £1 million along with a charitable donation, without any admission of liability. To many observers, a financial settlement structured this way looked less like vindication and more like a payment designed to make an uncomfortable legal fight disappear quietly. Giuffre died by suicide in 2025, having spent years campaigning for accountability not just from Andrew but from everyone who had benefited from Epstein's network. The final unraveling came in 2025, when a fresh tranche of documents from the broader Epstein investigation surfaced new details about Andrew's conduct, including evidence suggesting he had forwarded sensitive, non-public British government information to Epstein while serving as trade envoy, and that he had personally tried to help broker introductions between Epstein and other wealthy, controversial figures. Facing mounting public anger and pressure from within his own family, King Charles III formally stripped his brother of his remaining royal styles, titles, and honors that October. The man once known as His Royal Highness the Prince Andrew, Duke of York, would from then on be known simply as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. It did not end there. In February 2026, on his 66th birthday, Thames Valley Police arrested Mountbatten Windsor on suspicion of misconduct in public office, in direct connection with those leaked government communications with Epstein. It was the first arrest of a senior member of the British royal family in roughly 400 years, a genuinely unprecedented moment in the modern history of the monarchy. He was questioned and released without charge while the investigation continued, but the symbolism of the moment was impossible to overstate. Buckingham Palace had not been given advance warning. King Charles, visibly shaken by the development, issued a brief public statement insisting that the law must be allowed to take its course and that the authorities would have his family's full cooperation. Reaction poured in from every direction. Geoffrey's surviving family released a statement saying their hearts had been lifted by the news that no one, not even a member of the royal family, stands above the law. Campaigners who had spent years pushing for accountability called the arrest long overdue rather than surprising. Commentators who had covered the royal family for decades, meanwhile, struggled to find a historical comparison for what they were watching unfold, because there,